Is there a chapter or two that you were surprised that people commented on? They had questions, or even from Amazon reviews? Is there a point in the book where it's just a topic of conversation more so than others?
You know, I'd like to say that there is, but honestly, we gotten pretty strong response, positive response to the whole book. But I think the parts that make people the most curious have to do with our analysis of a movie of the week. And when we first wrote the book, there were a lot of movies of the week in which we talked about the 7-act structure of a television show. And the 7-act structure, you know, there is a 3-act structure to stories. All stories have a 3-act structure. But in the Renaissance, for example, stories had 5 acts. And that's because they divided the horrible Act 2 that everyone hates. I call it the Serengeti Plain. Because it's the hardest part of the writing. They divided it into 3 acts, and now there's a 5-act story. And it's easier to write because each act has a beginning, middle, and end, and each act can be subdivided into twists and turns and scenes. So television goes even further and makes it 7 acts, and that's because of commercials that have to come after each act, etc. So people were curious to see that, but when they saw that the executives at the studios actually had a chart. Some of them actually took the chart into a pitch meeting and wrote down, jotted down what, in the chart, what the pitch was saying about what happens in each act and so on. So here's a filled out one based on a movie that we produced. And it shows one-liners of the scenes that occur in each act. And I think people realized that this was, they didn't realize how mechanical it was. And honestly, when I hear that, which I do often from writers when I'm, in the old days, at least when I was teaching at university extensions all over the country, I realized that they didn't have the mentality to be writers. So let me give you a great example. A woman named Millie Meyer, God rest her soul, wonderful, wonderful lady, was a client for years, came up to me at a UC Riverside workshop after, and she goes, I didn't want to say anything in front of the class because I didn't want people to make fun of me. But I took my favorite book, The Grapes of Wrath, and I outlined it. And is that stupid? And I said, no, you're the only craftsman in the class. I mean, that's what a carpenter would do. If he wanted to make a table, he would take a table apart and see how it was put together. That's what a mechanic would do if he wanted to build an engine. He'd take an engine apart. So that's exactly what you do. And when they see this kind of breakdown, they understand, exactly how the mechanics of it work. And honestly, until you get to that point, you're really not ready to be a professional writer, because if you thought that writing was a magic trick that you have to pull off every time, or a miracle, which I guess most writers probably would think miracle rather than magic trick, then it's impossible. Right? But it's not possible. I mean, it's not impossible. It's possible to be a writer. People have been writers for centuries. They've been storytellers. And storytellers tell stories in parts, and they know what the parts are, and they do them in a way that makes sense. And so the sooner you get down to the mechanics of how it works, the better. And that's what we try to do in our books, is to show people the mechanics. I'm looking through for there's another page in here where we show what we call an intensity chart, where you kind of type one-liners of your whole story on a single piece of paper. One-liners of all the important scenes in the story. Then you go between the lines, and let's say you put hyphens, 2 hyphens for a non-dramatic scene or a scene with relatively little drama, and like 5 hyphens for a scene with much more drama, and 10 hyphens with maximum drama, right? So now you've got a page that has all these hyphens on it underneath the sentences, right? Then you draw a line across the hyphens, connecting the hyphens. And then you turn it on its side. You turn the piece of paper on its side, and what you've got is something that looks like a roller coaster. And because it shows you the ups and downs in your stories based on the drama, the intensity of the drama in your stories. And that is a great diagnostic tool, because if you see that there's a whole slope in which the thing keeps going down, 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 and doesn't go up for a while, or it levels off, then you know you need to work on that part of your story. So that's what I call the mechanical approach. You know what I mean by mechanics? Like when you want to outline a screenplay or a book, you just use 3x5 cards, and you put on those 3x5 cards the obligatory scenes in the book. And you won't fill up a whole card because it'll just be a couple of words on each card. And what you understand when you start doing that is that creation of a literary work is what Aristotle called an imitation of reality. It's not reality. You're not building the cider house and the world around the cider house. You're faking it. You're making the reader believe it's there. And you do that mechanically by, like I would if I were making the movie. I'd build a house front that looks like the cider house, right? But it wouldn't have a back because I'm only going to shoot the front of it. So that's what you're doing when you're writing. You're just doing what's necessary to create the illusion that you're trying to create. And the audience believes that the illusion is real because it wants to believe that. And you've given them enough evidence to make them believe it. So you know when you're watching one of the old movies, when they were just, nobody was dealing with production value the way we do now. You know, it just takes a little bit to make you believe in the story, even if the acting is bad, right? Even if the set is laughable, but you still are in the story if the story is good. You know, if the characters are good and the dialogue is good. And that's one of the things that we try to instill in writers is learn the mechanics of it, because it's easier than you make it. You're not having to recreate a whole world. You need to do the right strokes to make the painting look like a person. And that's what we try to do in, the treatment book.